What's up, guys? And welcome back to the channel. Before we dive into today's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our weekly dose of mystery and suspense. You're not going to want to miss what's coming. Now, let's get into it. The fragrant aroma of freshly ground coffee beans usually filled the daily grind, a cozy corner cafe owned by 35-year-old Mark, a man whose passion for coffee was only rivaled by his love for his quiet, predictable life. But that all changed the day she walked in. Isabella, a woman with eyes that held 1,000 untold stories and a smile that could disarm the most cautious of men. At the same time, a shadow loomed in the city's underbelly, a local gangster known only as Silas, a man whose reputation for ruthlessness was whispered in hushed tones. The intersection of these three lives would brew a storm of obsession, betrayal, and a horrifying act of violence that would shatter the peaceful hum of the coffee shop forever, leaving behind a bitter taste of tragedy. The early morning hours were Mark's sanctuary. In the quiet solitude of his coffee shop, the daily grind, he found a rhythm that soothed his soul. The gentle whir of the grinder, the rich, earthy scent of freshly roasted beans, and the rhythmic hiss of the espresso machine were the instruments in his daily symphony. He was a man of simple tastes and quiet contentment, and his cafe was a reflection of his personality. The exposed brick walls were adorned with the works of local artists. Mismatched but comfortable armchairs were clustered in cozy nooks, and the low-hanging industrial lights cast a warm, inviting glow. His regulars were the heartbeat of his day. Mrs. Gable, a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for crossword puzzles and black Americanos, would occupy the window seat. Ben, a freelance writer fueled by a single latte that he would nurse for hours, was a permanent fixture at his corner table. Then there was the morning rush, a chaotic ballet of familiar faces and hurried orders that Mark conducted with practiced ease. He knew their names, their orders, and a small, cherished piece of their lives. He was more than a barista. He was a confidant, a friend, a steady and comforting presence in their daily routines. But the familiar rhythm was disrupted the day Isabella walked in. She was a vibrant splash of color in his monochrome world. She moved with a languid grace, her crimson dress a stark contrast to the muted tones of the cafe. Her dark hair cascaded down her back like a silken waterfall, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, held a depth that hinted at a life lived far beyond the quiet confines of his coffee shop. Her gaze swept the room before landing on him, and then she smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that sent an unexpected jolt through him. "I'll have a black coffee," she said, her voice a low, sultry melody that seemed to hang in the air long after the words were spoken. He fumbled with the coffee filter, his usually steady hands suddenly clumsy. He could feel her eyes on him, a curious, amused glint in their depths. He handed her the coffee, their fingers brushing for a fleeting moment, a spark of electricity that left him momentarily breathless. She became a regular after that, a daily dose of intoxicating beauty and enigmatic charm. She would occupy the same corner table, a book resting unread in her lap, her gaze often drifting towards him as he worked. Their conversations began with the polite, impersonal dance of strangers, but soon deepened into a more intimate exchange of shared dreams and hidden vulnerabilities. He learned that she was an artist, new to the city and seeking inspiration. She spoke of her passion for painting, her desire to capture the raw, unfiltered emotions of life on her canvas. He, in turn, shared his love for coffee, the intricate art of balancing flavors and aromas, the simple joy of creating something that brought comfort and pleasure to others. He found himself eagerly anticipating her visits, the highlight of his otherwise predictable days. He would find excuses to linger at her table, to refill her cup, to simply be in her presence. He was falling for her, a free fall into a world he never knew existed. What he didn't know was that Isabella's life was a carefully constructed masterpiece of deception. Her past was a tangled web of secrets and lies, a life lived in the shadows. And at the center of that web was Silas. Silas was a man carved from the city's darkest corners. He was a local gangster, his name whispered in tones of fear and reverence. He ruled the city's underbelly with an iron fist, his empire built on a foundation of extortion, gambling, and violence. He was a man of immense power and insatiable greed, a predator who viewed the world as his personal hunting ground. Isabella was his most prized possession, his beautiful, cunning accomplice. She was the bait in his elaborate traps, the siren who lured unsuspecting victims into his web. She had played her part for years, her loyalty bound by a debt she could never hope to repay. But something within her had begun to shift. The role she had once played with detached professionalism now felt like a suffocating shroud. She yearned for a different life, a life of normalcy, a life that Mark and his cozy coffee shop represented. Her feelings for Mark were a dangerous complication, a spark of rebellion in her carefully controlled world. She knew that Silas would not tolerate any form of betrayal. His jealousy was a possessive, all-consuming fire, and his wrath was a force of nature. As her connection with Mark deepened, so did the danger. Silas began to notice the change in her, the flicker of defiance in her eyes, the stolen moments of happiness she found in the quiet corner of a coffee shop. And he didn't like it. He started visiting the daily grind, his presence a dark cloud that overshadowed the cafe's warm, inviting atmosphere. He would sit in the corner, his cold, reptilian eyes fixed on Isabella and Mark, a silent, menacing threat. The regulars felt the shift, the palpable tension that crackled in the air whenever he was present. Mark, blinded by his affection for Isabella, was oblivious to the danger. He saw Silas as a rival, a possessive boyfriend, and he was determined to win Isabella's heart. He didn't see the darkness that lurked beneath Silas's polished exterior, the cold-blooded killer that lay in wait. The final act was set in motion on a rainy Tuesday evening. The cafe was empty, the city outside a blur of rain-streaked lights. Mark was closing up, lost in a daydream about a future with Isabella, when the bell above the door chimed. It was Isabella, her face pale, her eyes wide with a fear he had never seen before. "We need to leave, Mark," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Now." Before he could ask why, the door creaked open again. Silas stood there, silhouetted against the stormy night, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Going somewhere, my dear?" he purred, his voice a low, menacing growl. The next few moments were a blur of terror and confusion. Silas's men, who had been lurking in the shadows, swarmed into the cafe. Mark found himself on the floor, the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, a searing pain in his side. He looked up and saw Silas standing over him, his face a mask of cold fury. And then he saw Isabella, her expression a mixture of fear and a chilling, detached resolve. She held a gun in her hand, her arm outstretched, pointing directly at him. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I had no choice." The sound of the gunshot echoed in the small cafe, a deafening roar that was quickly swallowed by the storm outside. And then, there was only silence. Detective Miles Corrigan arrived at a scene bathed in the chaotic strobe of red and blue lights. The rain had subsided, leaving the city streets slick and glistening. The daily grind, once a beacon of warmth, was now a crime scene, its windows reflecting the grim tableau within. Corrigan, a veteran detective with a reputation for meticulous investigation and an unwavering pursuit of justice, ducked under the yellow tape. The familiar, comforting aroma of coffee was now tainted with the metallic tang of blood. The cafe was in disarray, a testament to the violent struggle that had taken place. In the center of it all lay Mark, the victim of a passion that had turned deadly. The initial assessment pointed to a robbery gone wrong. The cash register was empty, and there were signs of a struggle. But Corrigan's instincts told him there was more to the story. The violence seemed personal, an act of rage rather than a simple grab for cash. He began his investigation by interviewing the regulars, the people who had formed the fabric of Mark's daily life. They spoke of Mark with a fondness that bordered on reverence, painting a picture of a kind, gentle man who wouldn't hurt a fly. They also spoke of Isabella, the mysterious woman who had captured Mark's heart, and the menacing figure of Silas, the man who had cast a dark shadow over their idyllic cafe. Their fragmented stories began to form a clearer picture of the events leading up to the murder. They spoke of the palpable tension between Mark and Silas, the whispered arguments between Isabella and Silas, and the fear they had seen in Isabella's eyes. Corrigan's investigation led him to Isabella's lavish apartment, a gilded cage that reeked of ill-gotten gains. She played the part of the grieving girlfriend, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice choked with sobs. She told a story of a jealous ex-boyfriend, a man who couldn't accept that she had moved on. She painted Silas as a monster, a man capable of unspeakable violence. But Corrigan was a student of human nature, and he saw the cracks in her performance. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes when he mentioned Silas, the way her hands trembled when she spoke of the gun. He knew she was hiding something, a crucial piece of the puzzle that she was unwilling to reveal. His investigation into Silas took him into the city's underbelly. He spoke to informants, low-level criminals, and a handful of brave souls who were willing to risk Silas's wrath to see justice served. They spoke of Silas's ruthlessness, his cunning, and his ability to manipulate and control those around him. They also spoke of his obsession with Isabella, a possessive, all-consuming love that was more about ownership than affection. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, but Corrigan was still missing the connecting thread, the motive that would tie it all together. He knew that the key to unlocking the truth lay with Isabella, and he was determined to break through her carefully constructed wall of lies. He brought her in for another round of questioning, this time armed with the knowledge he had gathered from the city's underbelly. He confronted her with the inconsistencies in her story, the fear he had seen in the eyes of those who had crossed Silas, and the whispers of her own involvement in Silas's criminal enterprise. Her facade began to crumble, the cracks in her performance widening into fissures. The grief-stricken girlfriend was replaced by a woman trapped in a web of her own making, a woman who had made a deal with the devil and was now paying the price. Finally, under the weight of Corrigan's relentless questioning, she broke. The truth came pouring out, a torrent of confessions that painted a chilling picture of manipulation, coercion, and a desperate bid for freedom. She told him everything, about her past, her debt to Silas, and the role she had played in his criminal empire. She spoke of her genuine feelings for Mark, the hope he had represented, and the chance at a life she had never thought possible. And then she told him about the murder. She confessed that it was Silas's plan, a cruel, twisted act of revenge against the man who had dared to steal his prized possession. She had been forced to play her part, her life, and the lives of her family, threatened if she refused. She had been the one to lure Mark to the cafe that night, the one to create the illusion of a robbery gone wrong. But the final act, the one that would haunt her for the rest of her life, had been hers alone. She had been the one to pull the trigger. The confession was a breakthrough, but Corrigan knew that a confession alone was not enough. He needed evidence, something concrete that would tie Silas to the crime. And he knew that the only way to get it was to convince Isabella to do the unthinkable, to betray the man who held her life in his hands. Convincing Isabella to testify against Silas was a monumental task. She was terrified, convinced that Silas's reach extended far beyond the walls of the interrogation room. She knew that he would stop at nothing to silence her, that her life, and the lives of her loved ones, would be in constant danger. Corrigan, however, was a master of persuasion. He appealed to her conscience, to the memory of the man she had loved, and to the possibility of a future free from the shackles of her past. He promised her protection, a new identity, and a chance to start over. Slowly, tentatively, she began to see a glimmer of hope. The thought of a life without fear, a life where she was no longer a pawn in someone else's game, was a powerful motivator. With a deep breath, she agreed to cooperate. The plan was simple yet fraught with danger. They would set a trap for Silas, using Isabella as the bait. She would wear a wire, and Corrigan and his team would be listening, waiting for Silas to incriminate himself. The meeting took place in a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where Silas often conducted his business. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, the only light coming from a single, bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Isabella, her heart pounding in her chest, walked into the warehouse. Silas was waiting for her, his face a mask of cold, controlled anger. He had been expecting her, and he was not pleased. The conversation that followed was a tense, high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Isabella, her voice trembling but resolute, confronted him about the murder. She spoke of her guilt, her fear, and her desire to escape the life he had forced upon her. Silas, initially cautious, began to let his guard down. He was a man accustomed to being in control, and he saw this as an opportunity to reassert his dominance over Isabella. He began to boast, his words dripping with arrogance and a chilling lack of remorse. He spoke of the murder in detail, confirming his involvement, his motive, and his cold-blooded satisfaction in eliminating his rival. He spoke of the power he held over her, the fear he instilled in others, and the invincibility he felt. And all the while, Corrigan and his team were listening, every word a nail in Silas's coffin. They had what they needed. The raid was swift and efficient. The warehouse was surrounded, and Silas was taken into custody without a fight. The look on his face when he saw Corrigan, the realization that he had been outsmarted, was a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction for the detective. The trial was a media sensation. The story of the coffee shop owner, the femme fatale, and the ruthless gangster captured the city's imagination. The courtroom was packed, the public hungry for every salacious detail. Isabella, her identity protected, was the star witness. She took the stand, her voice clear and steady, and told her story. She spoke of her past, her coercion, her fear, and her genuine remorse for the part she had played in Mark's death. Her testimony, coupled with the damning evidence from the wiretap, was enough to seal Silas's fate. He was found guilty of murder, conspiracy, and a host of other charges that would keep him behind bars for the rest of his life. Isabella, as promised, was given a new identity and a chance to start over. She disappeared from the city, leaving behind the ghosts of her past, forever haunted by the memory of the man she had loved and the life she had been forced to take. The daily grind never reopened. It remained a silent, somber monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. The scent of coffee was replaced by the smell of dust and decay, the once warm and inviting atmosphere now a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the most ordinary of surfaces. Corrigan, sitting in his office late one night, looked at the case file, the final chapter in a story of love, betrayal, and murder. He had gotten his man, had brought a measure of justice to a world that was often devoid of it. But there was no sense of victory, only a profound sense of sadness for the lives that had been shattered, for the love that had been lost, for the quiet, simple man who had just wanted to make a good cup of coffee. He closed the file, the name Mark, a silent testament to the human cost of a horrifying criminal act. 5 years is a long time. It's long enough for a city to forget a tragedy, for the scars on the pavement to be paved over, and for a coffee shop that was once the heart of a murder investigation to become a soulless frozen yogurt place with glaring neon lights. But 5 years is not nearly long enough for the memories to fade in the minds of those who were caught in its wake. For Detective Miles Corrigan, the daily grind case was a ghost. It sat in his filing cabinet, stamped closed. But it never truly was. Every year, on the anniversary of Mark's death, Corrigan would pull it out. He wasn't looking for new clues. He was looking for closure, something he knew he'd never find. Justice had been served. Silas was rotting in a supermax cell. His empire crumbled to dust. But the victory tasted bitter. It tasted like the cold coffee that sat on his desk at 3 in the morning. He'd look at the photo of Mark, a stiff driver's license picture whose forced smile did no justice to the warmth the regulars had described. A good, ordinary man whose only sin was falling in love with the wrong person. Corrigan would sigh, rubbing the weariness from his temples. He had saved Isabella from Silas, but he couldn't save her from herself. She had been given a new identity, a new life, but he knew it was only a change of geography. The real prisons are the ones we build in our own minds. Hundreds of miles away, In a sleepy coastal town where everyone knew your name but no one knew your story, a woman named Anna was shelving books in a small library. Her dark hair was cut short now, and she wore plain, colorless clothes in a subconscious effort to be invisible. Isabella was dead. Anna was the one who survived. Anna's life was a routine of monotonous safety. Work, her small apartment, polite conversations with neighbors who were curious but not prying. She didn't date. She didn't make close friends. She kept everyone at a safe distance, terrified that if they got too close, they would see the cracks in her fragile facade, see the monster she believed she had become. But the past has a way of bleeding through. One day, a young man walked into the library who looked unervingly like Mark. Same brown hair, same gentle smile as he asked her for help finding a book. For a moment, Anna couldn't breathe. The room began to spin, and the sound of the gunshot in the coffee shop from 5 years ago echoed in her ears. She had to grip the bookshelf to steady herself, her knuckles turning white. The young man looked at her with concern. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'm fine," she managed to whisper, her voice a raw croak. "Just a dizzy spell." She hid in the break room for the rest of the afternoon, shaking uncontrollably. She had pulled the trigger. Coerced or not, threatened or not, the hand on the gun had been hers. Her whispered, "I'm sorry," to Mark had been the last words he ever heard. It was a weight that no new identity could lift. Some nights she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she could smell the scent of coffee and fresh blood on her hands. Back in the city, Corrigan decided to walk through the old neighborhood. The yogurt shop where the daily grind used to be was busy, filled with laughing teenagers oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded on the very spot where they stood. He felt like a ghost himself, walking through a world that had moved on without him. As he turned the corner, he nearly bumped into a familiar figure. It was Ben, the freelance writer who had been a permanent fixture in the cafe. He looked older, worry lines etched deep around his eyes. "Detective Corrigan," Ben said, a note of surprise in his voice. "Mr. Jensen," Corrigan nodded. "It's been a while." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking towards the yogurt shop. "It's strange, isn't it?" Ben finally said, his voice quiet and sad. "Like it was never here. Like he was never here." "I know," Corrigan said. "I tried to write about it," Ben confessed, looking down at his shoes. "I thought it was how I would make sense of it. But I couldn't. Every time I tried, all I could see was Mark's face as he handed me my latte, and the way he looked at her. At Isabella. No amount of justice fixes that." He said the old regulars didn't see each other anymore. Mark's death hadn't just been the end of a man. It had been the end of the small, warm community he had built. The heart had been torn out of the place, and nothing could replace it. The encounter stuck with Corrigan. The case wasn't just about catching the bad guys. It was about the ripples they left behind, about the lives that were permanently altered, the holes that could never be filled. A week later, a postcard with no return address appeared on his desk. It was a faded picture of a seaside town with gulls circling a pier. There was no greeting, no signature, just 3 words, written in a neat, trembling script. "I still remember." Corrigan stared at the words, and he knew who they were from. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a confession. It was an acknowledgement, a reminder that they were both bound by that rainy, fateful night, each serving their own life sentence, hers of guilt and his of memory. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that glittered like shattered diamonds. He didn't answer the postcard. There was nothing to say. He simply slipped it into the cold case file, next to the photo of Mark, because he understood that some stories never have a real ending. They just stop, leaving behind a ringing silence and the bitter aftertaste of what might have been. And in that silence, the ghost of the grinder from the past kept turning, milling not coffee beans, but the souls that were left behind. The postcard had become a permanent fixture in Corrigan's desk drawer, a silent testament to the unclosed loop of the case. For months, it was the only communication, a single, shared acknowledgement of the past. The silence that followed was a fragile truce, one Corrigan was content to let hold. He had moved on to other cases, other tragedies, the city providing a relentless supply of broken lives to piece together. But the ghost of the daily grind was never fully exorcised. It lingered, waiting. The truce shattered on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't a gunshot or a scream that did it, but the quiet, insistent buzz of his cell phone. The caller ID was blocked, but he knew the prefix. It was from the federal marshal's office, the liaison for the witness security program. He hadn't heard from them in 5 years. A cold knot formed in his stomach. "Corrigan," he answered, his voice tight. "Detective, we have a situation regarding your witness. Anna." The marshal's voice was grim and devoid of pleasantries. "Silas has been busy." Corrigan's mind raced. An escape? A hit put out from inside? The reality was somehow worse, more insidious. "He's granted an interview," the marshal continued. "A big one, to that TV journalist Evelyn Reed. The kind who cares more about ratings than repercussions. He's telling his true story. And part of that story, he claims, is revealing the identity and location of the master manipulator who framed him. He's talking about your witness." The knot in Corrigan's stomach twisted into a vice. This wasn't a physical attack. It was a character assassination designed to be a public execution. Silas couldn't reach Anna with a knife or a gun, so he was using the most powerful weapon he had left. The truth, twisted into a new and terrible shape. It was a poison dart aimed across years and miles, designed to destroy the fragile peace she had built. "Can you stop it?" Corrigan demanded, already knowing the answer. "First Amendment," the marshal sighed. "He has the right to speak, she has the right to print. We're moving her, of course. Standard procedure. But he's made this personal, detective. He wants her to know she can never be safe, that he still controls her. We thought you should be the one to tell her. She might trust the news from you more than from us." The process of getting Anna on the phone was a nightmare of security protocols and coded transfers. When her voice finally came through the line, it was small and thin, the voice of someone startled from a long sleep. "Hello, Anna. It's Detective Corrigan." Silence. For a long moment, he thought she had hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was a raw whisper, laced with a terror that 5 years had failed to dull. "No. Why are you calling?" He told her, laying out the facts as gently as he could. He spoke of the interview, of Silas's intentions, of the marshal's plan to relocate her. With every word, he could feel her world crumbling. "I see," she said, her voice hollow and distant. He could picture her in her quiet library, the walls of books suddenly feeling like the bars of a cage. "So I run again, and again after that. When does it stop, detective?" "We will keep you safe, Anna," he said, the words sounding weak and inadequate even to him. A laugh, sharp and brittle, cracked through the phone. "Safe? He's not trying to kill me. He's trying to kill the life I've built. He wants everyone to know who I was. He wants them to look at me and see a murderer, his accomplice. He wants me to be Isabella again. If he does that, what's the point of running?" Corrigan had no answer. He had put a monster in a cage, but he hadn't accounted for the length of its shadow. "I thought if I was quiet enough," she continued, her voice breaking. "If I paid my dues in silence, maybe God would forget I existed. But Silas never forgets." He listened as she took a few shuddering breaths, pulling herself back from the edge. When she spoke again, the fear was still there, but it was underpinned by something new, something hard and cold. Resignation, perhaps. Or resolve. "When does it air?" she asked. 2 weeks, Corrigan said. "They're already running the promos." "I see," she repeated. "Thank you for telling me, detective. Really. Anna, let the marshals handle this. Don't do anything rash," he pleaded, a sudden, sharp fear piercing through him. "Rash?" she said, the word sounding foreign. "I haven't done anything rash in 5 years. I've done nothing at all. Goodbye, detective." The line went dead. Corrigan stared at his phone, a profound sense of dread washing over him. He had created Anna to protect Isabella. But in doing so, He had trapped her in a life of perpetual fear, forever looking over her shoulder. Silas knew that, and now, from a concrete box 1,000 miles away, he was pulling the final string, forcing her out of the shadows. That evening, Corrigan saw the promo for the interview. Evelyn Reed's face filled the screen, serious and self-important. He was the king of the city's underworld, she narrated over a menacing photo of Silas. But was he a killer? Or was he the victim of a beautiful, deadly black widow? For the first time, Silas tells all. And a name you've never heard will soon be one you'll never forget. Corrigan switched off the TV in disgust. It was a circus, a public spectacle built on the ruins of Mark's life and fueled by the potential destruction of Anna's. He didn't know what she would do. He hoped she would listen to the marshals, pack a bag, and disappear into another bland, anonymous town. But the tone in her voice during that final, clipped goodbye told him otherwise. The woman he had spoken to was no longer just running from her past. She sounded like someone who was finally turning around to face it, and he had no idea what would happen when she did.